So let me, with that, introduce the last panel. While the panelists are coming up, let me introduce Mashail. Mashail Malik is Assistant Professor of Government at Harvard. She specializes in the political psychology of identity. Her focus is on ethnicity, immigration, and internal migration. Her book project is an interdisciplinary mixed method study of the rise and fall of ethnic parties in Karachi, in Pakistan. She received her PhD from Stanford in political science. She has an MA in international relations from the University of Chicago. And from Beloit College, her BA is in economics and philosophy, which is why I'm always a little nervous when I talk to her, because she's too well educated. But in any case, she's from Islamabad, and her research, as I said, looks at identity, migration, and political behavior across diverse societies. Mashail, it's very nice to have you here.
Thank you. So welcome to the final panel of this year's symposium, which is about the rights of rivers. So over the past couple of decades, this question of whether the river can have rights, that is, whether it can be the subject of the law as opposed to just an object of it, has moved from, sort of philosophical inquiry into a live, ethical, legal, and political question. And so this is not a question that can be answered by simply one discipline, which is why today's panel is going to look at this question from a bunch of disciplinary perspectives. So we're going to have a legal perspective, we'll have a perspective from comparative religion, we'll have a perspective from the history of science and environmental anthropology. And so each of our speakers today is going to bring their own unique perspective to this question. And I'm sure that we'll have some interesting conversations that are in the spaces between those angles. And so I'm going to introduce our first speaker now. Each speaker is going to talk for about 10 to 12 minutes. Then we'll have a short conversation between the panelists and myself, and then we'll open it up to Q&A and a conversation amongst all of us. So I'll start with Kristen Stilt, who is a professor of law at Harvard Law School. She is faculty director of the Brooks McCormick Junior Animal Law and Policy Program, and director of the program on law and society in the Muslim world. Her research focuses on Islamic law and society, animal law, and comparative constitutional law, particularly at the intersection of animal law, religion, and culture. She is the author of Islamic Law in Action and co-editor of the forthcoming Oxford Handbook of Global Animal Law. She is a Guggenheim Fellow, a Radcliffe Institute Fellow, and a Carnegie Scholar. Welcome, Kristen.
Right, thank you very much, and thank you, Mittal Institute, of which I am a part. But thank you for all the parts of the Institute for hosting this amazing event today. So I'm going to be, as all of us are going to be, quite quick in our remarks. We have plenty of time for questions. I come at this from a legal perspective, a historical perspective, but mainly a rights of nature perspective. My research and writing has been in the area of rights of nature and rights of animals and the intersection of the two. And I have been active in several cases before courts in Ecuador and now South Africa, and some other places, dealing with the question of what can rights of nature do or think about when it comes to animals. But rights of rivers is also extremely important and very much part of this conversation. And so I just want to briefly situate it in the context of rights of nature, because I believe it is part and parcel of that larger debate. And so just for context here, rights of nature is sweeping the world at a fairly rapid pace. You can find constitutional language in Ecuador explicitly giving nature, or Pachamama, where life is reproduced and occurs, the right to integral respect for its existence and for the maintenance of its regeneration, of its life cycle, structure, functions, and evolutionary processes. And the court has elaborated this language in a good, at least a dozen cases at this point. But the rights of nature have been recognized in many other ways by national constitutions, other than national constitutions, although Ireland and Aruba are debating the inclusion of it. But courts, legislation, indigenous governance bodies, and others are recognizing and considering recognizing rights of nature writ large, of which I believe rights of rivers are certainly a part. Okay. So rights of rivers, or legal personhood of rivers, which is similar but not exactly the same thing, can likewise emerge from various sources, including court decisions and legislation. And while similar language may be used to describe the concept, in practice, the rights that a river may receive and the mechanisms for identifying and protecting those rights differ from context to context. That is a big takeaway point that I want to communicate in context setting. So I'm going to briefly overview two examples from Bangladesh and New Zealand Aotearoa, where you'll see that compare and contrast for how rights of rivers have emerged and how they are in action. So let's just start here with the region that we're all here to talk about. This has already been referred to, the Tora River, but I want to highlight the court case, which began, as the judge notes, with this series of journalistic reports. And so this journalist did a study over time looking at this portion of the river, which was essentially, as he calls it, being land grabbed, right? So building out into the river. And so you see 2013, 2014. Now this is from a different angle, but you'll see now even more building, blocking off of the fence, building the wall, and then 2016. If you see the on the far right, oh, it's not. Okay, here we go. Okay, so 2013, you start to see a wall being built. See a little more action here, and the journalist documented all of this in the press. This comes from a different angle, but you see this big wall being built, and then finally, if you look over on the right, where behind that blue fence, that is the result of this one particular piece of land being essentially the rivers being land grabbed, as the journalist called it. And so, what did this lead to? Well, this led to a case being filed in the Supreme Court of Bangladesh. And thanks to Mina Hewitt, who helped me get a translation of this, a 300-page decision. But essentially, the judge, quoting the Quran, then went on to say, look, Bangladesh and its rivers are inseparably connected. Since time immemorial, rivers have been the center of formation of societies and states, and have led the way to the progress of mankind. But today, the existence of the rivers of the whole world, including Bangladesh, is under threat of disappearing. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because this is a recognition, but what did the judge do? Right. First of all, directed that the illegal structures be removed, and then what's next? There we go. Directing that the illegal structures be removed, and then declaring the river as a legal person, legal entity, living entity, and not just this river, but all rivers in the country. Declaring the River Conservation Commission, which we had reference to earlier today, in being responsible for all the rights that the river should receive. And then I pulled these three out of a long list, but the last one is quite interesting. Directing the Ministry of Education to include subjects related to river conservation and pollution in the curriculum of schools, colleges, and universities to raise awareness. So I'm just giving you the lay of the case here. We can talk later about success and implementation, but I just want you to see what's the origins of this decision, right? And the judge gives quite a lot of credit to the journalist who put this in the public eye, and then a public interest litigation followed. Now, a very different context of emergence of legal rights for the river comes from New Zealand or Aotearoa. And for this, the best way to explain it is through a short BBC documentary, which we're going to show, and then that will be the end of my 12 minutes.
Every sort of living organism is just as important as you. Our is very much a personality of its own too. She's patient, she's consistent, she's persistent. You see the water sort of channel through rocks and it slowly cuts into these huge pieces, and then at times she just roars. She's very fierce in a way, but she does it so elegantly, is how I'd explain her. Yeah. My relationship with the river has kind of been my life. I've always considered the river being my greatest teacher, dearest friend.
It really is an exciting day for Parliament because this long-standing grievance is brought to an end by the passage of this legislation, and I very much look forward to working with the iwi and to seeing this wonderful river repaired and regenerated over the years to come.
For a very long time, this country has grappled with the place of Indigenous peoples, with colonisation. And finally, we had a place in which our river is valued for what it is. They can see us now, because they can see our river for all that it is. And therefore, we felt valued 2 years ago when the legislation passed.
The first thing we need to understand is that a legal person is different from a human person. It is a fairly profound statement about what matters to the law and who matters to the law. And then they therefore have rights and duties and powers under the law. Once the Wanganui happened, it really inspired a lot of people around the world. And since then we've seen kind of rolling examples over the past 2 years of rivers and lakes receiving legal rights. We need to think about what kind of legal person are we actually creating? What kind of legal model is actually going to give us the outcomes that we want? The paradox of legal rights for rivers happens because the right to go to court to defend your interests can actually backfire for the environment. So one of the things that we've seen happen around the world is that when nature starts getting rights of its own, people get complacent. People then start being afraid of what the river could do to them because the river is now constructed as a competitor with people. This is quite different to what's happened on the Wanganui River so far. It's a much more sustainable model than we've seen in other parts of the world. It has significant funding, so if it needs to take some action in the future, it does actually have some funding to start doing that, and it's embedded within new management arrangements and institutions that give all stakeholders a voice in the new management of the river going forward. Indigenous empowerment has been a really significant outcome of these pieces of legislation.
People are coming to us now. The new consciousness that people have around what this river is, they're coming to us and asking, can we access the river in this particular way? That's something that hasn't happened in 150 years. What we know is that in 20 years' time, when the reconsenting for that scheme happens, it'll be a far different decision-making framework that will be applied. The river faces a whole lot of challenges, but it's within our grasp.
Just as much as people can sort of praise this idea of the Awa being recognised as its own legal entity, there's also importance in having discussions with people who are against that idea. We appreciate discussions like those, even the tension that lies in it.
The fullest expression of what this news for the river means will come in 50 years' time, in 2 generations' time, because we will have had time to grow a community that understands its relationship with this river. It will change the way in which we think in this country, absolutely.
All right, thank you so much, Matt. So thanks for showing that. So my mandate here was to sort of lay out a general idea of rights of rivers, where the right might emerge from, and what it might mean. And by giving you just 2 examples, I think it sets the stage for conversations and questions that we'll have afterwards. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen.
So last but not least is Diana Eck, who is Professor of Comparative Religion and Indian Studies, Emerita, and Frederic Wertham, Research Professor of Law and Psychiatry and Society at Harvard University. She also serves as Faculty Director at the Lakshmi, Mittal and Family South Asia Institute. She is a leading scholar of religion. Her work focuses on both India and the US, examining sacred geographies and pilgrimage traditions in India, as well as the challenges of religious pluralism in America. Since 1991, she has led the Pluralism Project at Harvard. She is the author of influential books, including Banaras, City of Light, and India, A Sacred Geography.
Thank you very much. And what an interesting thing. You know, I can't remember when I first heard about bacteriophages, but when I heard about them, I thought, oh, well, that's the reason that people don't get so very sick in the Ganga, because they have all these bacteriophages that are in there, scooping up and eating the viruses and the bacteria. Maybe that accounts for their distinction between dirtiness and purity. I don't know, but I think this bacteriophage business fascinated me from quite a few years ago. So I want to turn back to the question of the rights of rivers and what kind of rights they are. I might begin with the title of the book I mentioned last night by Robert McFarlane, called Is a River Alive? And he actually looks at 3 different contexts to answer that question. But it's a question we need to ask as well. We've talked about rivers being dead, as the Ganga at Kanpur is described as being dead, and the Yamuna through Delhi to the Chambal confluence is said to be dead. Well, so we can say that a river is dead, but what does it mean for a river to be alive? And that question is one that I think it's worth asking all ourselves. I mean, if I asked you to say, is a river alive, how would you respond to that? And what would you mean by your response? So that's certainly part of what we need to discuss. We kind of have a sense of what it means for a river to be dead. But if we think about a river as having life, what kind of life is that? Free-flowing, having a personality, as the Maori said of the river in New Zealand. What kind of life does a river have? And when we think of it free-flowing, full of all the things that that a free-flowing river brings by way of benefit, there is something compelling about that. So then to ask, well, does a river have rights? And I think it's great to have Kristen with us here, because she has expanded all of this into the rights of nature more generally, or the rights of non-human parts of our environment, including animals. And that question of animal rights is also a very significant one today. The rights of the environment, the rights of what we might more generally call nature. How do we think about those rights? If rivers are, as the High Court in Uttarakhand said, that the Ganga and Yamuna are legal persons, they have juridical personhood, what kind of rights does that entail? Who is to exercise those rights? What kind of legal person would a river be? And who would argue on behalf of the river in a court of law? I mean, these are questions that ultimately the Supreme Court of India asked and found that the Uttarakhand High Court pronouncement of legal personhood was all very well and good, but they couldn't figure out how that would ever be implemented. If rivers have rights and can be juridical persons, can you sue a river, the one that bursts through the banks and destroys your home and your highway and everything else? You know, can people claim a river is responsible? And if one is talking about the wholesale pollution of a river, how is a river going to argue that? So then there's the whole question of guardianship, of having human interlocutors who argue for the river and her rights on behalf of the river in a court of law. And I imagine that is what happens in some places. If you were to say, what about in New Zealand, for example? So, you know, there are lots of questions that come with that notion of whether a river has rights. It is a legal entity, a living entity, which is what was said by the Bangladesh High Court. And what kind of living entity is it? Now, in McFarlane's book, Is a River Alive? He answers that question very positively. The first whole chapter deals with the issues in Ecuador, where the government of Ecuador was the first, or maybe the first, they say they were the first, to actually enact the rights of nature in their constitution. So that when the mining companies came to try to get groundwater and mining rights beneath some of the high country fastnesses of Ecuador, they were denied on the basis of constitutional protection. And the author of this book goes up to the heights where Los Cedros River begins in Ecuador, and where there also is what is called a cloud forest. That was my first introduction to what a cloud forest is. But it is literally an environment that exists mostly in the clouds, incredibly rich in wildlife, plant life, insects, mushrooms, and all sorts of things. So both the Los Cedros River and the cloud forest are legally protected, and that has been established now, not simply in the Constitution, but by cases that the constitutional lawyers brought against mining companies. And one has a sense in that chapter of McFarlane's very well-written book that the life of nature is something to be preserved and deserves preservation. The second chapter is a little different, and Kristen likes this one a lot too, and I do too, of the many rivers that flow into Chennai, or did flow into Chennai. But actually, over the course of time, those rivers have been filled in and built upon. So now, you know, Chennai, well, it's a little like parts of Boston. It's basically been built upon rivers that have died. Well, you think they have died, but if there is a huge monsoon and a lot of river activity, they pop up again. They're not dead at all, they're just down there. And so the question of how Chennai is dealing with this is an extraordinarily complicated one. And that chapter is well worth having a look at, because there is the sense that the rivers are alive. We just don't see them most of the time. And when we do see them, they pop right up. And then the third is about a river in Quebec. And it has a very large, long native name, but it is for sort of ease of pronunciation called the Magpie River. And it is a long and very, very fast-flowing river that runs eventually into the St. Lawrence mouth of the St. Lawrence. And in that sense, the river is alive in a very different way. The author and his companions undertake a kayak trip down this river, and you can't begin to see the tremendous force of the river as they navigate for almost 800 miles down this river on kayak. So the sense of the life of a river is something that's very, very present. But, you know, the question of what it means to have rights given to nature, I think, is one that is perplexing to many people today, but is actually running very, very energetically around the world in different places. And as I mentioned last night, there's a whole book now documenting all the cases of the legal rights of nature. Apparently in Pittsburgh in 2010, there was a case in which Pittsburgh passed a resolution on the rights of nature. It has a fairly swift-flowing and confluence of rivers there. But, you know, there was definitely a sense, I mean, Pittsburgh's a pretty industrial town. And then there are others as well. We've mentioned New Zealand, Ecuador, also Colombia. And in the United States, the rights of nature in different ways. For example, the wild rice in northern Wisconsin actually petitioned for legal status because it was being ruined. The wild rice fields from, you know, the runoff of waters from Canada or something. In any case, I think this issue is one that we actually need to think about because it's new, for some people puzzling, perhaps off-putting, but one that asks us, you know, who the beneficiaries and stakeholders of rivers are. And we've asked that question in a number of ways at different times, but I think it's a question that needs to be put to all of us. Is a river alive? If so, does a river have rights? And what kind of rights are there? And who is to protect those rights and litigate on behalf of the rivers? Or on behalf of Mother Nature, as Madras described it when they gave Mother Nature rights. So I think that's enough from us, probably. We should really open this up a bit and see what all of you who are present here today have to say about it.
Okay, thank you to all of our panelists.
Listen, thank you very much. Please stay seated for just a few more minutes. The chocolate chip cookies are in the oven and they're being brought in the back, along with some scones, which I promised earlier to some people, and the coffee. But I just wanted to first of all, from my point of view, say thank you to all of you. I think it's a very auspicious beginning of what I hope to build, that we can build into a project. And just because we're thinking of the Institute as a whole, I wondered, Professor Ek, if you had some concluding words, and I also thought, Tarun, from your perspective. And also there's one person here, Mukesh Prasad. Mukesh is a Harvard alum whom I've known for 35 years. Tarun, Diana Ek, and I have all three known him. Professor Ek was his professor, actually. And he was dreaming of this institute before it existed. So I thought it would be nice to hear just a few minutes from the three of you, if you don't mind. I'm putting you on the spot here. Is that all right?
That's fine. My only few words would be, as you've heard Hitesh say many times, I mean, a lot of what we do is driven by the fact that we need funding, but funding is only the means. The real energy we have is from people like you and those of you who have suggested topics, who have gotten engaged in this one, who can really think about putting some energy into this. And, you know, it's that people energy that will drive it forward. So thank you very much for getting so engaged and hoping that we will, with the engine of that engagement, drive this project forward. Thank you.
Tarun, I'll come to you last. Mukesh, why don't you come up?
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone had an amazing, fulfilling day. I know I stand between you all and snacks, so I'm going to try and be brief. I just want to start off by saying what a testament to Hitesh and Professor Ek and everybody for putting together an amazing, amazing day. That the Friday afternoon, the room is still full. So one more round of applause, I think, for them and the whole staff. You know, 35 years ago, Hitesh always talks about the origins. In 1991, the original business plan dreamt of an institute that met the needs of three linked but separate constituencies: the faculty, the students, and the greater alumni community. It's amazing because over the years, the idea was that the center, the institute, would serve as a nexus for all things South Asia and all things Harvard. So people on the outside that wanted to come to Harvard and look for projects or people interested in South Asia would have a portal to go to, and likewise our community, if they wanted to go out in the field, would have a portal to go to seek help while they were out there. From over 20 years ago, when the initiative was finally created, with the help of many people here today, to in 2013, when it was endowed by the wonderful gift by the Mittal family. I just want to say that the amazing thing is the Institute, under the leadership of Tarun, Hitesh, and now Professor Ek, has not only met all three of those goals, but also added in a fourth constituent, which is society itself, which I think is what you hear. It's amazing, especially with this last discussion. It's moved beyond just academic discussion. It's moved into the impact. Over time in the Institute's tenure, projects have touched every part of the university and societies that we seek to serve, but not only the populations within region itself, but also diaspora throughout the world, whether the Kumbh Mela, climate change, Lancet study, and now rivers. SAI has marvelously been able to stay true to the mantra of One Harvard, the bringing together people from all parts of the university to look at large problems while not losing focus on the multitude of small problems. As you spent the day here today reiterating something that Professor Ek said, our hopes are that the day inspired thoughts about the topics presented, as well as other topics that come to your mind, and you are moved to reach out with ideas that will help the Institute's efforts, and more importantly, ready to roll up your sleeves and get down to work with the team here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tarun. Thank you.
Tarun.
I cede my time to the cookies. Have a lovely rest of the day. Luckily, the clouds have cleared, and just a warm thanks to everybody who especially sat through. Personally, I find it very difficult to sit in one spot for this long, but it's a testament to so many wonderful colleagues. Thank you all.
And speaking of colleagues, I just want to say all the things, I said this in the morning, happens with a very, very small team. I think all of them are here. I see Mirella here. Mirella, where are you? There you are. Please stand up. Mirella is our Director of Finance and Operations. She really makes everything work. There's Aparna. Where's Aparna? You've been seeing, there you are. Aparna is our Head of Communications. So She and Kelly, who's not here, all the newsletters and all the communications you get come from her. Back there, Danielle and Ava. Ava pays all the bills. And so we love her especially. And Danielle really runs the office. So Danielle and Ava, thank you so much. It's a very small team that does everything, and I'm so honored to be working with them. So thank you all very much. Please enjoy the cookies. I got up at 5 a.m. to make them, but they're now ready. And we will be in touch about this, and don't forget, in turn, to remain in touch with us about this and other projects. Thank you, and good day.